Well, our final speaker I'd like to introduce. I'm very excited for this speaker. I first met Shukriyah Brown when she accompanied one of her clients to a visit with me and Dr. Irwin, and she's going to talk a little bit about her relationship and connection to Sherry. She then continued to work with our group and is connected with me as my patient advocate in an oncology social work research collaborative. And really, I developed such a fondness for Kriya. Her energy is infectious, as you'll see, and she's incredibly excited and passionate about working with this population. And Dr. Irwin and I are very fortunate to now have Kriya be part of our team as our new community health worker. And so I'm just delighted to introduce my friend and now my colleague, Shukriyah Brown.
Good morning. So bear with me. Okay. So I met Sherry a little over 4 years ago when I got a job as a program coordinator at North Suffolk. I was overseeing a 10-bed program, and she was a long-term resident there. Sherry lived there for about 23 years. She was a person living with schizophrenia who lived as full a life as could be offered to her. She was a firework. She was sassy but kind, loving, and very outspoken. She had an impeccable taste in fashion, and she had a personality that shined through a smile that would light up the darkest room. She was such a free spirit. She liked what she liked and made sure to share her love of things like coffee and cigars with everybody she encountered. Shopping was her all-time favorite thing to do. She took very much pride in her appearance and always made sure she looked and smelled her very best. She was loved by many. I never knew what it meant or identified as a caregiver until Sherry was diagnosed with cancer in 2016. It was at her initial appointment with her oncologist, Dr. Temmel, that Sherry and I first met Dr. Irwin and Amy Corveline and was enrolled in a study for patients with SMI and cancer. I took on the responsibility of bringing Sherry to her appointments just to make sure that everything was communicated effectively. And, well, honestly, I promised Sherry that she wouldn't have to face it alone. Besides that, Sherry had a fun way of making it seem like things were okay when in fact they really weren't. Being able to directly engage with Sherry's MGH team was the first time in a long time that I felt supported when it came to the needs of the people that I serve. It didn't matter that I didn't have a licensure, that I was just a group home manager. They respected my input and acknowledged the bond that Sherry and I shared. It also allowed for direct contact and not the runaround, being transferred to different providers, leaving various messages. They cared for their patients and treated each of them as individuals, not just a number or a subject. A prime example of this is when Sherry was going to have day surgery. I had requested her to be given something to ease her nerves because she was naturally a nervous person. I was afraid she wasn't going to be able to get through the procedure since I couldn't physically go there and hold her hand. The rehab that she was at during that time gave me such a hard time, even though I explained the necessity for it. I had met with Dr. Irwin at one of her follow-up appointments, and as I was explaining the situation, before I could even finish, I had the script that I needed for Sherry to have a successful procedure. One of the biggest setbacks that I had with Sherry is when she fell out of bed and broke her hip. She required a surgery to put pins in place and then was transferred to a rehab all the way in Needham. It was there that she was expected to regain her walking ability. When I went to visit her, my team and I, along with the clinical coordinator, expressed our desire to have Sherry back in the group home. But due to certain policies and procedures, we can only hold her bed open for a small period of time. While Sherry was in the rehab, she engaged with physical therapy, she made new friends, and she did her best to try to walk independently. I visited weekly, maintained communication with her social workers, I brought her clothes and cigars, and I just shared time with her. I also made sure that the group home staff and the clients of the group home went to visit her so she would never be alone. A little over a month, despite Sherry's best efforts, she was unable to regain the strength required to not only be able to walk independently without her walker, but to walk up the numerous steps all the way up to the group home. Unfortunately, on top of this, Sherry also lost eyesight in both of her eyes due to cataracts. So the decision was made, with all these factors, that her bed would be closed out of the group home. At that point, she was no longer considered one of the people that we served. I ultimately was told that I could no longer accompany Sherry to her appointments. Despite my argument that she had nobody else and that we were a family, I was told that it was the job of the nurses at the rehab to bring her. The first thing I could think of is how unfair it was for Sherry to be left alone. It was almost as if it was her fault that she got sick and she could no longer return to the place that she had called home for over 23 years. The rehab location was just too far away from where her family resided, which was Chelsea. So with the permission of her guardian, I made a few calls and I transferred Sherry to a long-term facility that was only 5 minutes from the group home. This made it ideal for all of Sherry's housemates, her day program friends, and her long-term companion to easily visit her whenever they wanted. Despite being told that I could no longer support her, I continued to support Sherry. I worked longer days in order to leave early, in order to accompany her to her appointments, and just be there when she needed. Sometimes after her appointments, we would sneak by the group home and I would sit her on the steps so that she can chat and have a cigar with whoever was home at the time. If I couldn't make it to an appointment, I made sure that I sent another responsible person in my place. Usually it was my APC who was working alongside of Sherry and I. I've seen firsthand the stigma and ignorance around SMI, but when Sherry was diagnosed with terminal cancer after being in remission for a while, the incidents of stigma were more apparent. One of the very last things I wanted to do for Sherry was make sure she had cataract surgery. Despite being told, what's the point, she's dying, or why does it matter, she's too sick to enjoy it. We did it anyway. The first time we scheduled it, I met Sherry at the clinic at 6:45. 6:45 in the morning, we were at the clinic. She was so nervous. But we made jokes. I held her hand. I took pictures of her, and I showed her. A few minutes later, the nurses came over, and they asked if she had had her meds. I explained that she was in a nursing facility and that I had to call to verify. For whatever reason, the nurses, they didn't give Sherry her morning meds, and that's why her blood pressure was high. It ultimately resulted in her not getting surgery that day. I shared this story to share as we were waiting for the blood pressure to come down. One of the nurses walking by motioned to the nurse that was with us and said, "Oh, it looks like you're babysitting again." I don't think I've ever been so insulted in my life. Sherry didn't understand what was happening, but that comment was kind of what fueled the already burning fire. We absolutely rescheduled that appointment, and we went back a couple of weeks later. Sherry got her eye surgery and was happy to be able to see after being in the dark for so long. Over time, as Sherry's cancer returned, it was me who was tasked with talking to her about her end-of-life plans and how she would like to be remembered. With Sherry's mental health also declining, she was oftentimes coherent, and it was hard to understand what exactly she was saying. What I could grasp from her was that she wanted to be celebrated, and that was okay with me. I used my role as Sherry's caregiver to advocate to the very end for what seemed like sometimes her basic needs and respect as an individual. I found a purpose in using my voice to elevate hers and make sure it never got lost in translation. Sherry was a very resilient woman, and if she was willing to fight, I just wanted to be beside her. What I wasn't prepared for was the time that Sherry would no longer have the energy to fight, and the battle would ultimately be over. It had been a little over a week since I had seen her. Work had gotten extremely busy, and I couldn't squeeze in the time during the day to see her as I had before. Studying for midterms, I didn't have time at night either. 3 days before Thanksgiving, I got a call from Amy saying that Sherry wasn't doing well, and if I planned to go see her, I should probably go soon. I wasn't ready to say goodbye. Primarily for selfish reasons, but I just wanted her to be with us, also understanding that she was tired and ready to go. The next day, I tried to rush through my day so that I can get to the rehab to see her. By the time I got there, it was already close to 4. I got upstairs and I was greeted by a nurse who told me that Sherry had been brought to the emergency room because she stopped breathing and had turned blue. There's no nice way to express my feelings. I just remember being furious. Turns out the rehab didn't have the DNR that I had been asking the guardian to send over for months. Not sure why I didn't have a copy, but looking back, really wish I did. They said that Sherry was suffering and they couldn't bear to see her that way, so they called 911. I remember crying angry tears, and I remember frantically calling Amy to find her. I kept picturing her in the ambulance, alone, barely breathing, and frightened. I rushed down to MGH from Chelsea, and I met Amy in the emergency room. When I saw Sherry, she was semi-alert. Pretty sure she could hear us talking. She knew we were there, but she also looked really tired. At one point, I was just holding her hands and saying how I needed to bring my purple nail polish because her nails were getting faded. and she pulled my arms. I couldn't figure out if she was pulling me closer or trying to get me to pull her out of bed, but it was gratifying to know that she at least knew I was there. I stayed for a little while, waiting for her to get to bed, but it started getting late and I had an early morning meeting. So I whispered to her, "Don't leave until I come back." I think she heard me. So the next day, I finished my day. I got to the hospital around 3:45. When I saw Sherry in the bed, she looked very peaceful. You know, she was smaller than the night before. And she had on an oxygen mask. And the oxygen mask was bothering me because her tongue was white and it was just making her mouth dry. And honestly, I don't really think it was doing anything for her. I asked the nurse if we can remove it, and she got permission from the doctor to do so. I spent the next few minutes just brushing Sherry's hair. I sang songs to her, held hands, and I told her how proud I was and how strong she had been. I also told her how much I was going to miss her. I made sure that she knew that she was loved and wasn't alone. 30 minutes later, Sherry passed away with her hand in mine, listening to me singing Bruno Mars' "Count on Me." Looking back, when I think about the supports and the things I wish I had, I first wish that there was a way for Sherry to stay in the group home. Continuity of care is what everybody talks about, but it's especially important for those who are getting up in age and who have lived in programs all their lives. I also wish there were more resources for myself as a caregiver, to know that I wasn't alone and to ease my mind so I wasn't always worried about everything happening to her. Training for group home staff is such a necessity. We have no idea when or how to access palliative care, and most times, even though we know the clients the best, we aren't even involved in the conversations that take place. Staff should feel inspired to advocate for their clients under their care and empowered to seek the best care accessible. In the end, Sherry taught me about life, love, and the importance of being true to yourself, regardless of what the majority think. She taught me to be patient, never give up on what I felt was right, and she taught me how to be a better caregiver, mother, and student. She taught me it was okay to be compassionate and never back down just because somebody says no for the first time. Sherry taught me that everyone deserves a chance at the best quality of life, regardless of what their diagnosis is. It's been 6 months and I miss her every day, but I'm so thankful that she allowed me to fight alongside her. Without her, I might never have known how important the little things in life are, and I wouldn't be at MGH now as a part of a team as dedicated and compassionate as I am. Thank you.